Okay, good morning, everybody. It is now 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and begin. I'm glad that you are all with us and to join us for this ESOL Program Guidance webinar series about ensuring English learner access to equitable education in Arkansas. This is the first of a 5-part series, and each one will be recorded, and the PowerPoint will be provided along with the recording on the ADE English Learners webpage. In addition to it being recorded and posted, we have with us Miguel Hernandez and Alan Lytle. They are with us to monitor the questions and answers that you may have as we go through the presentation. Guys, do you want to say hi real quick to everybody?
Hello, this is Miguel Hernandez.
Hi.
Hey, I'm glad that they're with us. As you have questions, please post those questions in the Q&A box that should be on your Zoom screen. And then at various points throughout the webinar, I will stop to see if you have questions and try to answer them now during the webinar. And if I'm unable to do so during the webinar, there'll be a follow-up email with those questions. Our agenda today is we're basically going to go over the goals and purpose of the guide that has been released by ADE for you. We will go over why SEAs, that means ADE, and districts, why we have an obligation to English learners and their parents. We'll go over what do we mean by an ESOL plan development, and then briefly review the key components of what will be in a comprehensive plan. These key components we will actually address more in depth at the next 4 sessions. We'll talk about the kind of support that is provided in the ADE English Learner Guide and some of the sample forms and flowcharts that are in there or will be in there shortly, as well as what our next steps are. At ADE, we believe that the effective education of every English learner is the responsibility of all educational personnel. That means that everyone from classroom teachers, ESOL teachers, principals, counselors, those who are instructional assistants, how they are dealt with from the front office, how interactions are with custodians, with cooks, with school services, with all aspects of the educational program. Effective education requires that excellent English language development and supplemental services are rendered to English learner students. And effective programs for English learner students respect and celebrate all students' native language in the context of both school and community. It is important that we encourage our students to continue the use of their first language, encourage their parents to do so with their children. They can use their language to help access English, and we will talk about that more when we get into the sessions on programming and instructional support. And those will probably be topics of future trainings offered by the department. Part of this is to fully meet the demands of the current language arts, math, and science standards and to ensure access to an equitable education for English learners. ESOL programs that you develop at your district, they're expected to provide an effective English language development program. That's one part of it, and we'll talk more about that throughout the series, and provide support to English learners so that they learn how to effectively employ a second language in an academic setting while learning through that second language, knowledge and skills in multiple disciplines. In other words, students need to have a program that helps teach them English and that helps teach them how to learn in a second language in other classes besides their ESOL class. This guide was based primarily on 2 resources. The first one is actually, it's on the right side of your screen, is the January 7th, 2015 Dear Colleague letter that came from the U.S. Department of Justice and the Office for Civil Rights. This letter reiterated and outlined SEA and district obligations to language learners and provides guidance for what is or is not acceptable in various components of the programming that we are expected to provide. The second resource has been out in the field for quite a while, and it's the OCR Programs for Language Learners Guide that they have provided to help districts plan how to provide services and assess whether or not they are doing so. But what I did is we took the pieces from both of these items and tried to merge them into a more user-friendly format for districts in Arkansas. Generally speaking, the contents of the ESOL program guidance includes an overview of the ELP standards, the English Language Proficiency Standards. There will be training coming this summer and in the fall about the standards, and that will be discussed more then. There's a list of common terminology and acronyms that are used in the program guide. I'm sure there are many more acronyms that we use in our field that we don't really discuss in the guide, but this at least tries to help explain the terms you may encounter in the guide and what they mean. It has in there what are called the Language Instruction Education Program, or LIEP, components. In the past, those who've been in the field a little bit longer have heard this called an Alternative Language Program, or ALP components. These two terms are interchangeable. The term LIEP actually started with the No Child Left Behind version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, but it is also incorporated into the new ESSA Act. A note about ESSA and the impact it will have on the program guide. As we know more about the specific requirements of ESSA, the program guide will be updated. However, everything that is in the program guide is current and the current expectations. I don't expect a lot of that to change. It will be tweaked. Part of what's in the guide are appendices with resources. This guide was also developed by input from ESOL programs around the state and country, as well as information that Mark Vasquez, an attorney, has presented to summer ESL graduate academies regarding providing equitable services for English learners. Miguel and Alan, are there any questions so far?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, a district brought up to my attention a definition that is provided in the handbook about what is a language instruction educational program. This was taken directly from Title III, and the wording is straight from that. Part of this definition includes that it's an instruction course in which a limited English proficient child is placed for the purpose of developing and attaining English proficiency while meeting challenging state academic content and student academic achievement standards as required by the section listed, which is part of Title I. These are references from the No Child Left Behind. The definition is similar in the current ESSA. The second part of that definition talks about you may make instructional use of both English and a child's L1, which means their first language, to enable the child to develop and attain English proficiency. And then the last part of that sentence, it may include the participation of English proficient children if such course is designed to enable all participating children to become proficient in English and a second language. Note that the last part of that especially is not allowed in Arkansas under our current laws regarding the language of instruction in classrooms. And regarding the portion about making instructional use of both English and the child's L1, using tools such as word-to-word dictionaries, programs like Imagine Learning that incorporate the use of a child's first language just for directions and to gradually transition into all English while they are learning English, those things are acceptable. what at this point in Arkansas is not acceptable is providing direct bilingual instruction. So I just wanted to clarify that if you see that in the guide. Okay, now we will go into what are our school district and SEA, this applies to ADE as well. What are our obligations to English learner students and their parents? Part of the reason I'm providing the legal obligations to many of you now, I know that several know this, and this may be a review for you, but we often are asked by other stakeholders, why are we providing an English learner program? Or parents will ask, why do I have to have this done? Why is my student being tested? Why is my student being placed in an instructional program designed to improve their English proficiency? And these are some of the legal reasons why, and it's just here for your reference and to remind us all why we are doing these programs. First of all, Title VI has several expectations for us. The first part of this is that it prohibits recipients of federal financial assistance, including SEAs and school districts, from discriminating on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Every district and the SEA receives federal financial assistance of some sort. If you receive any Title I funds, for example, you're receiving federal financial assistance. But there are other sources of federal funds in schools as well. Part of what Title VI specifically requires is that SEAs and school districts take affirmative steps to address language barriers so that English learner students may participate meaningfully in schools' educational programs. The Equal Educational Opportunity Act. It states that SEAs and school districts should take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by their students in their instructional programs. And then Castaneda versus Picard expectations. This is a three-pronged approach to deciding whether or not the state and a district is doing what is expected for our English learners. First of all, whatever approach you decide to use in your district, whatever that theory is underlying the language assistance program you provide, should be recognized as sound by some experts in the field or be considered a legitimate experimental strategy. The program and practices used by the school system should be calculated and implemented effectively so that the theory that you've adopted by the school will actually work. In other words, what that one is saying is when you find a program or a research-based approach to working with English learners, look at what were the parameters around the implementation of that approach. That means what kind of training were teachers required to have, what kind of grouping occurred, how long does the instruction take place, what materials were provided, how were the students evaluated for progress. If you are following a certain educational theory or a program, then you need to be following it in the way that it was designed to be implemented. Some people call that implementing a program with fidelity. Then they also expect that the program succeeds in producing results indicating that students' language barriers are actually being overcome within a reasonable period of time. And part of that is if it doesn't produce results, that you change what you're doing and provide a program that does so. This is just a visual representation of how Castaneda versus Picard works in designing a program. You can see at the top that it involves selecting the educational approach, which we will talk a little bit about today, but we will talk more about in a future session. That it has to be about learning English and meaningful participation in education programs. Then you have to implement that educational approach. You need to design and implement the ESOL program to meet the approach and the goals of the program you choose. Then you need to do a program evaluation which includes everything from information collection, analysis of that information, and a plan for improvement. We will deal more with each of these issues throughout this series. This doesn't just apply to school districts, just so you know. SEA, which is the ADE, we also have a responsibility under these civil rights laws to provide appropriate guidance, monitoring, and oversight to school districts to ensure that English learner students receive appropriate English learner services. And on behalf of Miguel, Alan, and I hope you know that we're a team that are here to help you serve the students that are in your district and to provide an equitable education for them. We're here as a resource and as a way to help you find the right information when you need it. But in order for us to help you, just keep reaching out to us, and we will do our best to help you in any aspect of implementing your program that we can. If we ever were to select an English learner instructional program model that we said you would follow, which we haven't specified a specific program, then we would have to have requirements and guidelines. We'd have to have practices in place that also comply with the Castaneda requirements. We would have to evaluate whether it was making a difference, and if it was, we could continue, and if not, we'd need to redesign what we were expecting. Then there are Title III expectations, and this is just an overview of Title III expectations. I am sure that Miguel will be providing further training in the future for those districts directly impacted by Title III, but the handbook does address some of the components that are required by Title III. This Title III requires SEAs in school districts that receive funding under the subgrants to provide high-quality professional development programs and to implement high-quality language instruction programs. They both have to be based on scientifically based research, and they need to be designed to enable English learner students to speak, listen, read, and write English and to meet the challenging state standards. But just because you don't have Title III, several key district requirements for recipients under Title III are also required by Title I of the ESEA, and this has no minimum enrollment requirement. Examples of things that are required of all districts if you receive Title I, which are all districts that have English learners that I'm aware of. One is that you annually assess the English learner student for English proficiency. And under ESSA, there will be expectation that all schools are accountable for that. We will have future training on what exactly that means. That there are specific written notices that are provided for parents of English learner students, and it prohibits discriminating on the basis of surname and language minority status, which goes into why we have to provide appropriate services and to remedy any language deficits or language needs that students have in accessing the state standards. Because the civil rights laws require that SEAs and school districts take appropriate action to overcome language barriers for English learner students, Title III funds may not be used to fund the activities chosen to implement an SEA's or school district's civil rights obligations. They can use these funds for activities beyond those activities necessary to comply with federal civil rights obligations. Regarding funding and legal obligations, one thing that is pointed out in especially the Dear Colleague letter is that it is important to remember that the legal obligations of an SEA in a school district under Title VI and the Equal Educational Opportunity Act are independent of the amount or type of state or federal funding received. Okay, I'd like to stop now and see if there are any questions.
Tricia, on the, we have two questions. Can you see those?
I can, but if
It's asking what would monitor look like in the absence of a specified program. We have not been previously monitored, and what would that look like? I would like to address that. Your Title III coordinator, when they made application this year, in there is a booklet that is called the self-assessment checklist. And on that self-assessment checklist, it has specific questions onto if you were to be monitored for Title III. And again, when I say monitor, it means that I will assist in case the feds come in and look at your school district. I would help to answer those questions or to look for those documents that they would be looking for. And so it's a good idea to go to your Title III person and say, hey, let's look at that self-assessment checklist so that I can make sure that we're complying with all the requirements. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, and in regard to districts that only receive state EL funds, basically how you're accountable for those funds is what you submit in ACCEPT via INDUSCAR, and there will be more feedback coming regarding those narratives that you needed to submit. We know that that was a new system this year, a new approach to how you account for those funds, and there will be future guidance coming out about that specific issue. Okay, the other questions, I saw one about communicating with parents in the language they understand. One thing that we are working on at the department is anything that we are requiring parents to be made aware of, or communications with parents. We're in the process of updating how we get those items translated and into what languages. I think you saw that in some recent communications from Commissioner Key were translated into Spanish so that could be shared with the parents in your districts who spoke Spanish. That will be increasing over time. It takes a little while to get all of those systems in place, but we are working on that. As far as something that is clearly delineated for the language instruction educational program, why don't we see how that goes, how that's answered over the series of this webinar. I think a lot of the information that is included in your ESOL program guidance will help answer those questions about what is expected. Part of it is we won't tell you exactly what to do, but we will provide guidance on questions to ask yourselves about how are you addressing the various components. And the important thing is that they're addressed, not always exactly how they're addressed. However, we'll also mention some resources that will help you look at various ways that districts can address each component. Okay, we're going to go on. Part of what an ESOL plan is that it does need to be comprehensive. Each district should have an ESOL plan. Research has shown in OCR, when they have gone into districts to work with them or to visit with them, they have found that when the plan is written down and it is accessible to all those involved in the implementation of the plan, then the plan is more likely to be being carried out correctly. Each part of the plan needs to be comprehensive. It needs to address each aspect of the district's program for all English learner students at all grade levels and at all schools in the district. So it needs to talk about how are you addressing English learner students at elementary or at middle school or at high school. And if you have multiple schools at each grade level, how it's being implemented at each building. It needs to be viewed by district staff as containing useful information. So you should have useful information in there. It should contain enough detail and specificity so that each staff person can understand how the plan is to be implemented. It should contain the procedural guidance and forms they need to use to carry out their responsibilities under the plan. ADE won't tell you what procedures you need to use in your district because each district is completely different and you need to develop those procedures. One thing that I will be working on shortly is a live binder where districts who have developed some procedural guidance and forms can share with me, and I can make available to all of you some sample handbooks from other districts so that you can learn from each other. Part of in your ESOL plan, you should answer the following questions. Who's responsible for this step? For example, when you talk about how you're going to identify potential English learners, well, who does that? When is this step to be completed? When do you identify potential English learners? What standards and criteria are to be applied to this step? In other words, how do you know that this step has been accomplished? And then how will the district document implementation of this step? How do you keep track of the fact that you are doing that step of your plan? Okay, are there questions at this point that have not been answered?
Tricia, there was a question on, it says we're stuck with getting Arabic translation interpretations. Can you provide a resource of where to access some of those difficult language translations and interpretations?
Okay, I will work on some sources that can be used for that purpose, and I'll make sure that that's available by the time that we address that piece in this webinar series. Okay, we will go on. These are the key components of a comprehensive ESOL plan. The first part is, what is your educational theory for your program of services? We'll talk about that in just a minute. The district's methods for identifying and assessing the students to be included in your district's ESOL program. That will be discussed in the next session that we have. The specific components of the district's program of English language development for ESOL students. What this is talking about is, how are you specifically developing the English language? What are you doing to teach these students English as their second language? It's not enough just to say, well, we're teaching them in English, so we're teaching them English. And that will be discussed in a future session as well. Then, what specific staffing and other resources are you providing to English learner students under your district's ESOL program? And when we get to that part, we will talk about some questions to ask yourself and some situations that are considered examples of that, and some that are considered to be some compliance concerns. What are your specific methods for providing meaningful access to all curricular and extracurricular programs? In other words, how are you providing access to your math classes, to your special ed programs, to your sports programs, your music, instructional curricular programs, science, all of those areas? What are you doing that is helping your English learner students access that in a way that is meaningful to them? That might include things like teacher training or outreach to parents to inform them of what opportunities are in the school, or training students about what opportunities are there and encouraging their participation. Another component is what approach you're using to avoid unnecessary segregation of English learner students. When we get to that part, we'll talk about that we're We're not talking about grouping for instructional purposes. Grouping for instructional purposes is okay as long as it's for a specific purpose and for a specific time frame. Another component is the approach that you will use to evaluate EL students for special education services and providing dual services when appropriate. I know from the questions I've been getting from you in the field that this is a question, an area that many of you would like to see us provide more guidance and more information about it, and we are working on that. We will talk more about that in that session. Another component is the district's approach to meeting the needs of English learner students who opt out of ESOL programs or particular ESOL services. These are your parents who decline services, and you don't have them participating directly in your ESOL program, but you are still obligated to help with their language needs and to make sure that they're able to meaningfully participate in all aspects of your curriculum. Then you need to have in your plan what method and procedures you will use for exiting students from your ESOL program and for how you will monitor their success afterward. As you know, under No Child Left Behind version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, you had to monitor students for 2 years and could include them in the English learner subgroup for accountability purposes for those 2 years. I know that in the future we'll be able to include them in the accountability group for 4 years, which will include monitoring them for a longer period of time. In addition, another component is the district's method for evaluating the effectiveness of your program for English learner students. We will address that briefly in one of the sessions coming up in this series, but also over the next year or so, I anticipate providing some training on what does program evaluation look like. I know that that's been a difficult component for many districts to accomplish, and we have identified some resources that could potentially help us here in Arkansas, help in the area of program evaluation. And then one of the final things you need to make sure you have is what procedures you're using to ensure meaningful communication with limited English proficient students. Okay, and we will stop here to see if there are some more questions.
Yes, this question is if a parent opts I guess it's out of the ESOL program, but wishes to participate in a specific service. We provide extended year programs. We are obligated to provide that extended year service, even though through the student is not in the ESOL program, or do we get them signed into a program first?
Right. That is a good question, and what you can do, what will happen when we get to that part of the training, actually parents can opt out of each piece of the services you provide. So in the situation you're describing here, they can participate in the extended year service even if they don't participate in the service provided during the school year, or vice versa. They could participate in the one during the school year, but say, no, I'm not going to participate in the extended year service. So they can opt out of pieces of your services. It does not have to be and can't necessarily be an all or nothing approach. Okay, is there another?
Yes, it says what resources are available to document that our alternative language program is recognized as a second educational theory by experts in the field.
Okay. I think I'll be addressing that in just a minute, and there will also be a tab within the Live Binder that will have some links to things like websites, scholarly articles, books that you can look at and decide for yourself what you would like to use.
Okay. Going back to the first question, it says Does this mean that we provide a menu of choices for opting into services, and what would that look like?
Okay, about parents opting in or out of services. If you have a menu of services that you offer to parents, you need to be able to explain to the parents what each of those services are. And when they're asking to opt out, you can ask them, are you opting out of everything, or is there a particular piece you would like to participate in? That will look different for every district and what they're able to offer, and depending on the design of their ESOL program. So you would need to document in their waiver that they sign from services, which services that they are declining and which ones they want to continue to participate in. You would need to write that in such a way that it was clear. If you ever want to run a form by me or something to see if that looks like that meets the expectation, I'd be glad to look it over for you. Okay, I think we're going to go on and see what's next here. Okay, about selecting the educational approach. ADE and the Office for Civil Rights does not prescribe a specific program design or educational approach. It is the school district's responsibility to ensure that the educational approach selected addresses these two components. I will keep emphasizing that you need to have both of these components addressed in your ESOL program. Whether the approach provides for English language development, and whether the approach provides for meaningful participation of English learner students in the district's educational program. Both pieces need to be addressed in your ESOL program and how your district has decided to help students with these. Many times I see in districts that the English language development, it might be a pullout. It might be provided during the language arts time in the classroom by an ESL endorsed teacher who is providing specific English language development services. But then the part about meaningful participation, it might be training classroom teachers on what they can do to help students access the curriculum in their classroom. Some approaches that have been used for that purpose have been SIOP, or the Sheltered Instructional Observation Protocol, or the Gradual Release of Responsibility model by Fisher and Fry, or constructing meaning that is provided by EL Achieve. We will actually address this more when we get to, I think it's session 3, about the educational approach. But those are some ideas of what the differences are between providing English language development and then providing for meaningful participation. But when you get the PowerPoint for this, you will be able to actually go to each of these links. This first one, I wonder if it will let me show you what it is Language Instruction Education Programs Report that was provided that shows what research has been done in the area of LIEPs. And it is a very useful source. I'll see if it will let me open it here. I thought I had it open. Okay, it is this booklet right here, the Language Instruction Educational Programs, a review of the foundational literature. And in this document, it was developed in May of 2012. It has what research says about LIEPs in general, what research says about the ESL approach, and about the bilingual approach. Just keep in mind that in Arkansas, we have to use an ESL approach. It'll talk about that high standards and challenging content being good for ELs, that having a program is important. Research has shown that just having a program does improve achievement versus not having a program. No one approach or model is appropriate for all English learners. Depends a lot on the context of your district. That instructional practices are important variables in the design and implementation of an LIEP. Talks about the role of literacy in oral language development, how academic language can be incorporated in your English learner instruction, that they need instruction that is specifically cognizant of their needs as second language learners. Teachers need to be prepared to teach English learners. Some newcomer models that are an option school districts may use. How you interpret their scores on academic content assessments. How some current assessments may not be the best measures for linguistic proficiency, but we are, as a country, working on better assessments in that area. And culture and community. But it goes a lot more in depth to that. So this is a resource that I would recommend that you look at as a district to help make some of those decisions for your district. Okay. The other tool that I mentioned on the in the PowerPoint here is the Office of English Language Acquisition with the Department of Education has released an English Learner Toolkit. And the Chapter 2 of their toolkit, specifically on pages 7 through 9, has some resources for selecting the educational approach that you are using. Those links for this document, the link for this document is provided on the ADE's English Learner website. So I'm not going to look there at this moment. Are there new questions coming in?
Yes. Just to clarify, Arkansas must use the ESOL approach. Is there a commissioner's memo or something that clearly states this?
There is an ESL is a very broad thing. There is a law that I can give you the specific reference on later that talks about the language of instruction in classrooms in Arkansas must be in English. And that is the specific thing that basically prohibits us from providing a bilingual program. So basically there are two types of programs. There are ESOL programs and there are bilingual programs. And by virtue of that state law that we have that says that the language of instruction in our classrooms must be in English, and that is why we use an ESOL approach. So there's not going to be a commissioner's memo or something like that. It's just knowing that that other law is out there. And that will be a good resource that I probably should post on our website, whether it's in the live binder or if it's on the actual ADE English Learners page. Okay, I'm going to go on. Within the ADE English Learner guidance, there are a few specific requirements when necessary, but a lot of it is general guidance as to what to consider for each component. For each component, you'll see that there are guiding questions to help you ask yourself as a district when you're sitting down and deciding, for example, on the identifying who your potential students are. There are a series of questions you can go through to find out how you are doing that in your district and maybe identify some areas that you need to plan for that you haven't thought of. Or you might find out as you're going through this, yes, we're doing exactly what we need to be doing to be implementing this component. There are some examples of the component in action. These components in action are set aside in a box, and These are actual examples from the Dear Colleague letter that OCR provided that give examples of how districts around the country have actually implemented that component. And then there are some potential compliance issues provided for each component. And these are actually pulled from the Dear Colleague letter, and they are examples of when OCR, the Department of Justice, has been involved with investigating or in some legal involvement with the district, what were the specific compliance issues regarding that component. In our future sessions, when we go through each component, we will discuss some of these guiding questions, the examples of that component in action, and the potential compliance issues, so that each component we can talk about more in depth. Because as you can see, in an hour, we can't get into each component in depth to the degree they need to be addressed, which is why we have 4 more sessions. Then there are eSchool tips. eSchool is very important that you get the data in there correctly. The data that's in eSchool helps us when we're pulling testing rosters for ELPA 21 or for ACT Aspire. And if the data that's in there is quality data, then what you get on your end will be more quality data. We are all learning this together, but anytime in the handbook that you see this symbol called eSchool Plus, that is an item that specifically relates to what is in eSchool. Some things that are incorporated in the appendices are home language survey sample, an exit form sample, and a waiver of services form sample. There will be some other forms added over time. There are also some resources there to help you with ideas for program design. In the future, there will be an identification flow chart, an assessment flow chart, meaning mainly about your initial assessment, program placement design flow chart, an exiting monitoring flow chart, and a program evaluation flow chart. I hope to have those added shortly. The next steps that we have in this series is the next webinar is actually on a Wednesday, and it's the only one that is on a Wednesday. It's on Wednesday, February 17th. And in that session, we will specifically talk about the identification and assessment of potential English learners. This is where it all begins, and this is the piece that every district needs to make sure is in place so that you know who you are working with and can move forward in working with your district in designing your comprehensive ESOL plan. Then on Thursday, March 10th, we will talk more about the educational approach, because we will address the language assistance program that you're providing, staffing, and meaningful access to comprehensive curriculum. All of that works together. Then on Thursday, March 31st, we will talk about avoiding segregation, identifying and serving special education English learners, and addressing opt-out students. Then on Thursday, April 21st, we will talk about the components of exiting and monitoring students, as well as meaningful communication with LEP parents and program evaluation. Each of these are important components of your plan, and I look forward to visiting with you further about each component. Okay, what questions do we have coming in?
Okay, we have another question that we're supposed to follow the requirements from California Department of Education that when 15% or more of the pupils enrolled in the school speak a single primary language other than English, all notices, reports, statements, or report cards sent by the school or district to the parents or guardians of any such pupil must be, in addition to being written in English, be written in such primary language and may be responded to by the parent or guardian in English or in the primary language. Does this requirement apply to us in Arkansas?
I will need to confirm the percent requirement and look into that further. I do know that we are obligated to communicate with parents in a way they understand. That might mean if you want them to understand what you're sending home, if you're expecting the parent to know what you're sending home, you need to have a method of sending that home in their primary language, or providing them access to someone who can help interpret that and read that to them, and explain that to them in their home language. When we get to the session about meaningful communication with LEP parents on April 21st, we will address this in more depth, and I will find out a more specific answer for you.
Okay, I believe she also put the website that's on the California website. The other question is this: when you discuss staffing, would you include information about translators and how to fund this?
I will do my best to do so. Okay, other questions?
Another one by Dawn says, can report cards that are generated from school be translated within school?
I will look into that. And I see someone asked if we will compile the questions from all the webinars and put them in a Q&A section and post them. And yes, I will work on doing that as well. Are there any more questions?
I think that for now, I think that's the last question.
I'll go back over here. Other items of interest. ELPA 21, as you know, you're all in the midst of the testing window right now, and I do greatly appreciate taking an hour of your time during the window, a couple of times during the window. There's no other way to do this, as we have testing going on all spring, and this information is important for you as you plan for the next year and how to move forward with educating your English learners. But one piece with the ELPA 21 is a contrasting group study. Each state that's in ELPA 21 has a goal of students in relation to the size of our state to participate in this study. It's very important that we have enough participation. And right now we're at maybe a third of the required or expected participation. The purpose for this is to compare what you as the classroom educator or the person who works with the student, how you see them as being proficient in the areas of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and overall, and then comparing that to the results we get on the assessment. That will be very important to use when they are doing standard setting and to help the groups who are working at determining cut scores and such for ELPA 21. We want to compare with ELPA 21 actual performance and proficiency being identified and seen on an everyday basis by educators who specifically know each student, with how the student performs on the assessment. Without your participation in that, it'll be difficult and more challenging to have the best cut scores possible. So in order to make our ELPA 21 results the most meaningful that they can be, we really need you to consider having someone in your district participate in the contrasting group study. So I will be sending that letter out again to everybody, and you can contact Alan Lytle about how to participate in that. I do believe there's a link that you can go and sign up to participate in that study. And then another thing coming up, if you're not aware of it, is a February 26th ESL Symposium that's sponsored by the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. It will be taking place in Fayetteville, and Robin Sparcella is the speaker of interest at that symposium, and she does an excellent job of addressing academic English and how, as schools, we can work on developing English language, but also what classroom teachers can do to help develop the academic English that they encounter in their content areas. So this would be a very good professional development opportunity for you should you be able to participate. I will, when I send a letter out about the ELPA 21 contrasting group study again, I will also send a flyer out about how to register for the February 26th ESL Symposium. Just as a reminder, this is the team that's here at ADE to serve you and to help you with all aspects of your programming and things that come up throughout the school year. You can see all of our emails there, and we are here to serve you and to help you meet the needs of your English learners. Are there any further questions, or is that it for today?
There's no further questions.
Okay. Well, I want to thank each of you for taking time to be here, and I look forward to getting more in depth about each component. Today's training was an overview of what is in the ESOL program guidance and what to expect at future webinars. The different topics we'll be discussing more in depth, as well as an overview of the legal obligations that we have so that you can help those in your district who may wonder why we need to provide these services to students have a legal basis for doing so. I look forward to working with you further, and please feel free to call or email any of us at any time. Thank you. Bye.